One key thing to know when you're thinking about disclosures, and it's good to set this expectation with your sellers as early on as possible, is that when your seller's in contract, there are default expectations in the contract, and we spoke about some of this on the timelines portion. You're representing a buyer and you have a transaction, but this is really key for your seller to know that they owe their disclosures to the buyer typically within 7 days of accepting an offer. So if you have an offer, that means on day 0, by day 7, you should have a complete disclosure package to that buyer. In some cases, there's a lot of reasons you may want to do it much earlier than that, but just know the contract expects that you do it early. The buyer then has until day 17 to review and sign off and return those disclosures back to the selling side. So that's why you know not just that you gave it to them, but they've reviewed it, they've signed off, and they're not really agreeing or disagreeing when it comes to disclosures. They're just accepting them, meaning confirming that they received them. So as the listing side, you don't really care if the buyer likes or dislikes, disagrees with the disclosure. You're just helping your seller get confirmation that they made the legally required disclosures, and you have proof in the form of the buyer's signature on that disclosure that they signed and then returned. If the seller needs to disclose something and that time period has already passed, and let's say it's potentially way past, like they were like, oh no, I actually forgot, we made all of these changes to our sunroom at this certain time, and they didn't remember that until, let's say they did all those changes without permits and they forgot to disclose that. Escrow's closing tomorrow. It is way better to disclose that the day before close of escrow than to not disclose it. It's a non-starter. There's no conversation to be had here. Yes, you must disclose that prior to close of escrow. The catch is that because you didn't meet your timeline, that now opens a new timeline for the buyer that by default gives that buyer an additional 5 days to review this new information and decide if they're unhappy with it, to cancel and potentially get their deposit back. Just keep that in mind. If you do have to disclose late, disclose late. That's better than not disclosing. But if you do disclose late, just know you are opening up that time period. If that's a case where the buyer now does cancel and that has other ramifications for your seller, you don't want to be the agent who's like, oh yeah, I forgot we had to do this form. Now you do this form and now the buyer cancels. That's a really uncomfortable place to be with your seller, because if it's your mistake that led to a cancellation. So the best approach is always, even though you have until day 7, you want to get those things done as early as possible. Really, one best practice that's been long-standing is a lot of agents will have those disclosures ready and go through it with the seller at the time they sign the listing agreement. So even before you're on the market. And then you have these available, in some cases, to buyers even before they're making offers. They can review the disclosures. It doesn't mean they can't still make requests of the seller in the middle of a transaction, but you're just one by one removing uncertainty for that buyer and therefore increasing your chances that the transaction will go through to completion. So getting all these things out of the way, you're removing potential surprises that are going to come up during the transaction. So it's a much better way just to keep it smooth, get it done as early as possible if you can before the listing agreement. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you learned something or if this helped you solve a problem, follow me for more.